Hello and welcome to the recently rebranded People First Potential channel here on Bright Talk. We wanted to enhance our brand and make it match what you will find in other places like at peoplefirstpotential.com. That's where you'll find People First Leadership Academy. It is an extension of the content you find here, all related to personal effectiveness, team effectiveness, leadership development, and sales productivity, because all those things, what they have in common is that it's about unleashing your own potential in ways that put people first and help you to connect with others. I'm Deb Calvert, the founder of People First Productivity Solutions, celebrating our 16th anniversary today, and of People First Leadership Academy. I hope you'll check it out over at peoplefirstpotential.com. For those of you who are new to Bright Talk, let me give you just a couple of logistical things. First of all, while you're here, be sure and register for some of our other content. You can go backwards. There's a lot here that's already on demand. And we've recently posted our schedule for the 2022 sessions that will all be grouped in a series called Why Wait to Be Great? And there's a variety of topics. We're going to start with some that are fairly new, emerging topics like sense making, what that is and what it means to you as a leader. We'll talk about executive etiquette, especially in light of how many meetings are now virtual. We'll be talking about the 12 dimensions of trust, overcoming imposter syndrome, meeting facilitation skills, and a whole lot more. So I hope you find some topics there that are of interest for you. I'm Deb, as I said, and I've been producing content here at Bright Talk for 6 or 7 years. I think there are some really awesome things about Bright Talk that I want to point out to you. First of all, if you look under the video, there is a label there called Attachments, a tab. And if you click there, you'll see that I've given you lots of bonus content. Feel free to take whatever you see that you might like there. You'll find that there are PDF of today's slides for those who like to take notes that way. You'll also find that you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I hope you do, so that we can get acquainted and I can continue to know what's on your mind and what you'd like to see content about. And then as I go through the rest of the presentation, I'll mention some of the other links there as they become relevant. Here at Bright Talk, in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see headphones. They're orange. That's the Bright Talk tech team, and they're awesome. So if you have any technical issues, just let them know. They'll set up a chat with you and get you back on track right away. Last but not least, please notice that here on Bright Talk, you're invited to post a review. Give me 5 stars or whatever you think is merited here today, but also give me your feedback, your comments, so that I do know what you like and what you'd like to see done differently in the future, because this really is all about you. And I try to customize the content based on who's watching and what's on their mind, the questions that they're asking me. So, of course, if you're attending live, you can also post questions for me along the way, and I'll get to those immediately. Our topic today is a really interesting one. It's about making decisions and making them in ways that engage members of your group and don't get your team derailed or off track where conflict becomes messy or problematic in some way. So we'll be talking about the things that do derail decisions and how you can avoid those. In the 2022 series, we'll be doing, I guess you could call it a part 2 about decision making that will be more specific to the kinds of things you need to do to be even more inclusive in your decisions. But we'll go over to slides and take a look at one of the consider when it comes time to make decisions, because this is really one of the biggest problems and one of the most common mistakes that happens when it comes time to make decisions. It's the thought process that goes into those decisions. Of course, that thought process is influencing our decisions, and oftentimes we're not even aware of what's going on there. You see, when any of us, when we try to make decisions based on our own understanding, subconsciously, we're adding a whole lot of steps into that process. Without meaning to, we end up thinking a little bit selfishly and letting our emotions get in the way. By the way, if you're somebody who's very logical and you are able to make decisions more clinically, I do want to point out that even cold, hard logic is like an emotion. Stripping emotion out is in itself sort of an emotion of defensiveness, right? That dispassionate approach is no better and no worse than the more obvious emotions. Now, what you see on screen, the ladder of inference, that's a diagram of how this all works. And when we start out in the wrong place and add emotional or self-serving steps into our decision-making process, that's what's going on. That's what's illustrated here. Let me describe what happens in the typical decision. Think about any big or small decision that you've recently had to make, and you can probably track it pretty closely here. See, the first thing that happens at the bottom of the ladder is that we see the reality. We see the facts at hand, the situation. And we take in those facts, and because we're human, we selectively view that reality based on our own filters. Those filters, they're made up of our experiences, our biases, our comfort zone, our education, our upbringing, our resources, and a whole lot more. And so we interpret those facts and we select the ones that are easiest for us, and we put some interpretation into this. And our interpretation, of course, it's already skewed by these selections that we've made, this filtering that we've subconsciously done. And then we make assumptions and we apply them. I'd like to say that this is an easy thing to avoid, but the truth is most of us don't generally recognize when we're making assumptions. To us, they feel just the same as facts. And most of us, we're not very good at discerning between our own assumptions and facts. So here we are now, we're moving up the ladder, we're drawing conclusions based on our interpreted facts and our assumptions all mixed in together. And with those conclusions, we determine what we believe. Now, by this point, chances are pretty good that all this buildup didn't lead you to asking the opinions of others or mining for information that contradicted what you already knew, because it feels easy, it feels right to get to this point all by ourselves. But then we take action. We take actions based on our own beliefs, based on all this time and thought into this process that we've construed. And then it becomes a vicious circle because now we defend our actions, we repeat our process based on previous actions, and we continually narrow down what we select for consideration into our decision. Now, to recognize yourself, you have to think about where you are on the ladder and then challenge yourself. Why am I here? How did I get there? What have I missed? So, you were thinking about a decision that you've recently made. Let me ask you to think further back. Think about any decision that you made and later regretted making. If you walk through this ladder of inference thinking about that decision, one that you already regret, you already feel was maybe not the best decision, it's probably going to be a little easier to trace the steps you took up this ladder. And then you can recognize for you what the trouble spot might be. Is it the interpretation, the selection, the assumptions? Knowing where you got into trouble will help you to make better decisions. Now let's talk about another really common problem that occurs. You see, oftentimes we don't pause to reflect on what is the root cause, right? What's the real problem here? And then we react to the wrong problem. And you know what happens next. Then we make decisions that cause even more problems. And that too becomes a vicious cycle. There's no way around it. If we don't have the right problem, if we aren't making the right choices, we're not going to get to that place where we have quality decision making. Now, when it comes to those problems that you're trying to solve for, you're identifying them correctly. Let me give you an example. Hopefully, I'm not the only one who can relate to this, but it's an example of how decisions go astray. True confession, a few months ago, I decided to try on some pants I hadn't worn in a long time because I hadn't been anywhere in business in front of a large group. And those pants, they were pretty snug. They were uncomfortably snug. I was able to button them, but barely. And so, you know what I did? I diagnosed the problem. The pants don't fit. And I solved the problem. I jumped right online and bought another pair of pants in a larger size. Check. Problem solved, right? No, that was not the right problem to solve. The problem, if I would have gotten to the root cause, was, well, during the pandemic, especially over the winter months, I wasn't as active. I wasn't as careful. I wasn't as thoughtful about what I was eating, and I put on some weight. The root cause, the real problem, the one I should have been addressing and solving for, was taking care of the weight loss. So, fortunately, I came to grips with that situation. I took care of the root cause. But how often does this happen? In the day to day, we are so often forgetting to identify the real problem and then move on to something else. So often we fail to do that. We do the band-aid solutions. We solve symptoms instead of solving problems. And then we find ourselves right back with another problem because we never solved the root cause. And we can use up a lot of band-aids before we ever get to root cause unless we're more deliberative and we thoroughly think through what's going on. Here's another one, very, very common. And these are not indictments. These common problems are common because we're all in a hurry. We're racing to get so much done in any given day. We are pressured from every angle to try to be efficient and to get a lot done and to multitask and to check the box and move on to the next thing. So, what I'm telling you is that if you want to eliminate some of that stress and hassle and rework and recurrence of issues, well, the way you do that is by making better decisions, the ones that solve the right problems, and you make those decisions in a way that it's a good quality decision. We have to strip out some of our biases to do this. That also makes the whole process a little uncomfortable. But here's an easy way to do that. And this is especially good with groups. Before you even begin to assess your options, before you open up any discussion about should we go left or should we go right, before any of that, you set your criteria. These are factors, these are specific measures that you're going to use to later determine which alternative is your best choice. And it's much, much better to do this before you have options on the table because we're trying to eliminate our biases. If we do this after the options are on the table, well, we're going to stack the deck. We're going to pick criteria that favor our predetermined favored solution. So we do this first while we're still in a neutral place. Now, not only is it a good idea to pick those criteria, my ideal solution must have A, B, and C. Those are your criteria. But after you list them, you're also going to add some nice to haves. It must have these three things. The ideal solution would be really nice if it also included X, Y, Z. And when all voices have been in and when you've determined those decision criteria, go ahead and rank them. I've got 3 must-haves. Out of those, which one is the very most important? You do all of this, of course, after the real problem has been identified, because this is a little bit of work to do and probably not merited by simple band-aid solutions that aren't going to get you any real traction. So we'll be objective. We got to the root cause. Now we're going to think about a decision. But before we do, let's line out what the ideal, the outcome that we want, really looks like. And then when options are presented, When discussion is happening, your criteria that you predetermined will help you to sort it all out and to make really high quality, objective decisions. One more really big, very common problem, also not your fault. This is just the world we live in. We live in an age of infobesity, information overload. We are inundated, barraged with information coming at us from all over the place all the time. So you may be dreading the thought of acquiring and evaluating even more information before you reach your conclusion. But to make any good quality decision, you absolutely have to. You have to gather intel. And the best way to do this is by asking people with varying opinions, different backgrounds, unique experiences, diversity of thought. You want to get all those folks chiming in with the data points, the experiences, the opinions, and the information that they can offer. I know that sounds like a lot, but this is how you avoid making a hasty, ill-informed decision. We're going to talk about the big problems that come if you don't broaden your search for information, if you over rely on what you already know or what's easily accessible to you. Because what we're really talking about today, in addition to these 4 high level, very broad strokes, we're going to talk about 7 decision traps that stem from not addressing those 4 big problems. The first one, well, it's a big one. And this decision trap is groupthink. Now, let me step back just to say what I mean by decision traps. Right? These are thought processes that cause us to make poor or hasty decisions. Thought processes that interfere with the quality of our decisions and end up causing us a lot more headaches and heartaches in the long term. Now, groupthink, we've covered this in a variety of ways here on this channel. We've talked about it in the Connect to Lead blog. If you do go over to People First Leadership Academy, you'll see that we'll be introducing a course very soon that's all about good, productive, critical thinking. And there's also on our YouTube channel, People First Potential channel there's also a wealth of material that you can find. So I'm not going to spend as much time on this topic as it really deserves because you have lots of other resources that you can go to. But groupthink, that's what's happening anytime a group is going along with a strong leader, or the group, because they value harmony and they are maybe a little conflict averse, they agree to things that alone those individuals might not agree to. They prioritize the harmony of the group or the going along to get along above the opportunities to draw new ideas out and to look at things from multiple angles and to even have productive conflict that would help them make better decisions. It happens a lot in the workplace because we're all in a rush and we're all in more meetings than ever before. And we would just like to get out of those meetings and back to our real work. So we don't dissent. We don't raise our hand and offer a different idea that's outside the mainstream. We don't give feedback. We don't throw the red flag in and call cautions. We don't express our skepticism. We just allow things to happen. And we do this because there's a certain safety, or at least it feels like there's a certain safety. When it's the decision of the group, well, how could we possibly be to blame? It feels like there's power in the number. It feels like there's a certain safety that isn't really there. And so we do. We go along, and I bet you know what happens. I bet you've seen this happen. Here we are, another 3 months down the road. And it turns out that not only was that a bad decision, but now we have to go back and fix the problems that it caused, the unintended consequences that came from that group decision. But because it was a group decision, it's the best we could do. Nobody's getting blamed. There is no accountability. So we're lather, rinse, repeating. We do the very same thing. We succumb to groupthink. We make another ill-informed, hasty decision. And pretty soon it just becomes like throwing stuff up against the wall over and over and over again, one mistake after another. And that problem, the real problem, never goes away. So beware of groupthink if it exists in your organization. It's a trap. It's a sticky trap. It's hard to get out of that one when you find yourself in it. Now, this next decision trap is also a bit uncomfortable to talk about, but we're going to talk about it from 7 different angles. This is just a reality, again, not an indictment of anybody, just a reality. We all operate with different types of unconscious biases. An unconscious bias, it's a result of thinking fast. Right? Our brains are pressured and stressed by everything happening around us. So we want to make fast, automatic decisions about the world around us so that then we can react quickly and move on to the next thing. And that's useful. That's good. But it can also trip us up when we're dealing with decisions that have impact, when we're dealing with people. Right? We make snap judgments based on this fast thinking, our unconscious biases, and we miss out a lot. We miss out a lot because of these unconscious biases. They're rooted in emotions and assumptions back there on that ladder of inference. So we've got to be really, really careful not to let unconscious biases derail our decisions. Now you see 7 different types here on screen. I'm going to walk you through each of the 7 types, but I'm not finger pointing. If I were to finger point, it would be right at myself because I know, having heightened awareness, I know that I am guilty of all of these and that I have to really work to keep myself in check. Let's start right at the top. An affinity bias, part of human nature, is happening because it is just natural to feel affinity with people who are like us. Affinity bias is a tendency to warm up more quickly to people who seem like ourselves. Now, this plays out in an organizational context in all kinds of ways. Let's say when you're selecting somebody to work in your organization, right? The hiring managers, they have a tendency to sometimes see themselves in other people. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a manager who said, "Oh, I hired that candidate because she reminds me of myself." Well, how unfair is that? But also, that's completely natural. So we have to, in those kinds of decisions, have some objective criteria within the hiring and selection process, because those decisions have a huge impact on people, not just on the candidates, but also on the diversity and the inclusion within your organization and team. Now, what we know from research is that when there's an affinity between people, even if they're complete strangers, they'll tend to make more eye contact, allow each other more room to speak, and listen more closely to each other. And when there's not any instantly identifiable affinity based on all those assumptions and other things that are in our way, well, then we might talk over people. We might not listen properly to points they're trying to make. And that's where micro inequities or micro affirmations come from. And that's what makes the very same workplace welcoming and full of opportunity to one person, while another feels ignored or overlooked. So when it comes time to make decisions, you can't rely on the people who are like you. And like you doesn't mean just the obvious. It could mean Affinity because we went to the same school. Affinity because we came up through the ranks out of the same department. Affinity because we both like the color blue and happen to be wearing the same color today. This stuff can be really, really unusual in terms of what we gravitate to. But we have to be aware of it and check ourselves. The second type of unconscious bias that I want you to be aware of when you make decisions is an ambiguity bias. So, ambiguity, funny thing, I think, in organizations, there's a certain, competency about being able to tolerate or operate effectively even in the midst of ambiguity. That's something that's valued. But we ought to be trying to strip out the ambiguity because it does get in the way. I'm not sure that's a realistic competency to expect people to strive for. The opposite of ambiguity is clarity. Clarity creates confidence. Confidence creates courage. If we want people to operate courageously and confidently, we shouldn't expect them to operate in ambiguity. And ambiguity also compounds our affinity bias and affects our decision making anytime there's a lack of information. And so often, truly, so often there is a lack of information in fast paced, ever evolving workplaces. So, when there's ambiguity, the natural tendency for humans is to select options for which the probability of a favorable outcome is known over options where the probability of a favorable outcome is unknown. So, it means exactly what it sounds like it means. We're going to try to stay inside our comfort zone. We're going to make it an unspoken rule of thumb to avoid options where information is missing. And this is a bias, it's all subconscious. I'd like to say that there are specific things that you can do to erase it, but you can't. The best you can do is be aware of it and check yourself when you realize that that bias is being expressed. Now, confirmation bias is also something that I believe is at epidemic proportions. It's a powerful, prevalent bias, and we are all susceptible to it. Confirmation bias occurs when we select sources and we favor information that confirms what we already believed. This is what happens when you get stuck in an echo chamber, when you dismiss contradicting views, when you stop challenging your own thinking. Well, then you're going to seek information and prioritize information that agrees with you. If you listen, let's say, to one point of view in the news and not the other, you may be in an echo chamber. You are choosing news sources that focus on and report things that you already agree with instead of entertaining the idea that there might be some other information out there that's equally valid. Confirmation bias also affects how we interpret the information that's already right in front of us. We dismiss some, we affirm some, we defend some, and typically whatever favors our own beliefs, that's what we pay attention to the most. We attack or tear apart the information that we didn't already agree with instead of truly objectively considering it. And confirmation bias even affects how we remember things. Right? Even our memories are affected by confirmation bias. We interpret, we maybe even modify the memories and facts in our heads based on our beliefs. There's a classic experiment, maybe you've heard about it before. It was between Princeton and Dartmouth students. They were shown a game between the two schools. And at the end, Princeton students remembered more fouls committed by Dartmouth, and Dartmouth students remembered more fouls that were committed by Princeton. Both groups of students fundamentally believed that their school was better, so they tended to remember, to recall more instances that showed their school in a favorable light and the opposing school in a bad light. So here's the deal: when it comes time to make decisions and you have other team members with confirmation bias, subconsciously we're thinking of people the way we want to and not the way they actually are. And then we think about their contributions in the same way. If this is somebody who historically has disagreed with us, when they put some information out there, instead of equally objectively considering it, we're already a bit wired toward rejecting it. All right, let me give you some more of these biases. Every one of these affects decisions. And so we have to be aware of them to get better at decision making, not just in ourselves, but in others. They bring their unconscious biases to the table too. By the way, if you are interested in group training for a team, it's a wonderful team building activity to bring people together and expose some of these unconscious biases in a fun way that's also pretty profound, helps people to recognize and move through those. And teams can get so much better, so much faster when they have an experience like that. If you're interested in anything like that, just get in touch with me. All right. So this bias is called conformity bias. And this is why our confirmation and affinity biases so often go unchallenged. See, we also have this conformity bias. And subconsciously, this one causes us to want to go along with the crowd, even if we don't know the people in the crowd. But groupthink also stems from this. The group is making decisions because group harmony is prized and people in general want to conform. So here's another study. You probably have heard about this one. It's been around for decades. You know that conformity bias comes from peer pressure. Now, look at the screen. What you see there is what people in this particular study were shown. They were shown the picture on the left, exhibit 1, and they were asked to pick which of the 3 lines in exhibit 2 matched the line in exhibit 1. One individual was told to say what they really think, but the rest of the people in that group, before the experiment, they were all told what to say. In fact, they were told to give the wrong answer. So you can see pretty clearly in exhibit 1, that line is the best match to line 1A, rather, in exhibit 2. So exhibit 1 matches line A of exhibit 2. And that's what the individual who wasn't pre-fed information, that's what they would say over and over again. But then they would be watching the rest of the group say that it was line B. And in 75% of cases, the individual would scrap their own opinion. Even though this is plain as day right in front of them, they would scrap their opinion and change to conform and to pick letter B in exhibit 2. Clearly a wrong answer, but it seems like we would prefer to conform than to be on the outside. I'm going to keep going through these. The next one, I bet you've experienced this one too. Negativity bias, right? According to negativity bias, people are more likely to recall their unpleasant memories than they are to recall their pleasant memories. And then they act in ways that will help them avoid those negative events. So John Cacipio at Ohio State University, he did some research that showed that our brains react more strongly to negative stimuli. That was shown by higher electrical activity in the cerebral cortex when subjects were presented with negative images. So, of course, this also, if you've ever had any negative experiences, and you've also got this desire to avoid ambiguity, well, here you are again. If you're forced to consider information that doesn't support your point of view, and if you feel a need to conform to others' beliefs because being a dissenter in the past has had a negative outcome, all of that is going to suppress your desire to add something different into the mix, which inherently compromises the quality of decisions. So you've got to stretch past all of these biases. Otherwise, your negative memories, negativity bias is going to rear up and reinforce the ambiguity, the nonconformity type biases. So, none of these, by the way, none of these stand up to logic and objectivity. So, when you pull yourself back, pulling yourself back is asking yourself, why do I think this way? What proof do I have? And how can I think about this differently? It's a healthy exercise and one that makes teams and individuals so much stronger in their decision making. Now, I've got to give you two more of these unconscious biases. Here is attribution bias. This is a type of bias that, well, we need to make sure we're surfacing it in all types of situations, not just decision making. This is about how we evaluate ourselves and how we evaluate others, and why we tend to believe ourselves and in ourselves more than we do others. So here's how it works. You see, I've got 4 boxes here labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's based on the horizontal axis about whether or not this is a positive or a negative outcome. And then at the top, vertically, you see those 2 boxes on the top. That's about something for yourself and how you're gauging, judging yourself, versus the bottom 2 boxes, how you're responding to others. So let's say it's a positive outcome and it's for yourself. You've just been given a job promotion. You are likely to attribute that to how smart you are, how hard you work, what a nice person you are. You're going to take credit for it. But just below that, box number 2, if it wasn't you, but someone else who got that promotion, you're likely to attribute their success not to their hard work and being a nice person and their other personality traits, right? You're likely to attribute that to right place, right time, office politics. They're just lucky. You're not going to give them the same kind of credit that you would give yourself. And the same is true, but in the inverse when it comes to negative outcomes. So something has happened to you. I'm in box number 3 now. Box number 4, rather. We'll talk about you first. Something has happened to you, and it was a bad outcome. You're going to blame bad luck, circumstances, other people, certain sort of helplessness. It's not about you. But if it's somebody else and the bad thing happened to them, well, your thought might go toward they deserved it. They didn't do X. They have a lack in a deficit in their personality or their makeup. So we blame them for their negative outcomes in a way that's different from how we would choose not to blame ourselves. In decisions, because other people are going to be contributing to them, we have to be really careful here not to let judgments like these about people affect the quality of information and the way we're processing it that they could deliver. All right, last but not least is comparison bias. One more that you may not be aware of, but you've almost certainly seen it happen. You see, if we don't have objective decision criteria, we resort to a false dichotomy. We start to personalize it. We say John's idea or Mary's idea, as if the basis of comparison should be one idea versus the other. Not true. The basis for evaluating John's idea and the basis for evaluating Mary's idea should be the decision criteria that were objectively predetermined before you ever entered into the decision-making process. Anytime you attach people to something you're evaluating, you're really judging those 2 people against each other. And that ushers in all the other unconscious biases, the ones we've talked about, and some other ones too. And the impact of this, the impact of unconscious bias is big. Right? It affects everything. It affects our behaviors as we make decisions, our attitude toward people and decisions. It affects our perception of the quality and how we're going to pay attention and listen and what we're going to micro-affirm or microaggress. Right? We have to be so careful here. Unconscious bias when it comes time to make decisions has huge implications. Now, I promised you 7 decision traps, and that was only number 2. You'll be glad to know the others are not quite so long-winded. We had to go through unconscious biases, though, because they do affect all these other ones that are still to come. Decision trap number 3 is overconfidence. It's easy to be overconfident when you're in a group. It's also easy to be overconfident when you're very experienced or talented. We have to be careful, though, not to be overconfident, because this is what leads to all kinds of things in business: falling short of projections, missing deadlines, overrunning budgets, overestimating performance, underestimating risk. All of that can be linked to overconfidence. So, even in something that you're very confident about, when you make a decision, check. What's new? What's different? What's changed? What other ideas are there? Don't operate on stale information. Don't rest on your laurels. Go ahead and open yourself up to get sufficient evidence for the here and now, the decision that you're going to make. In groups, when you are making decisions, you might encounter this decision trap. It's known as anchoring, and that's from negotiating type language. But anchoring can happen to an individual. It can happen to a whole group when groupthink overwhelms us. Anchoring is whatever was put out first. And it's a strategy, right? Sometimes a leader might assert a position or a belief on purpose, or it could also be done unintentionally. Whatever a strong voice puts out there anchors the group's thinking. And then everything else that we think about in that decision-making process is in reaction to whatever was put out there first. Anchoring can actually really weigh us down. It's better to do a brainstorming session and get lots of ideas free form out on the table before one gets this weight and draws us all toward it over and over and over again. Here's another one with a very clear tie to our unconscious biases. Humans like a state known as homeostasis. That means we are in good equilibrium, balance to our environment. The status quo trap is that we are typically going to pick things that are close to our current situation. And if we settle for that, we can really miss out on a lot that could be innovative. We could be thinking that we've made a great decision when all we've really done is stayed right inside our comfort zone. And prudence feeds into that too. I'm not against being prudent, but just being on the safe side is sometimes the most dangerous thing that you can do. If you don't look at all the angles, you might be making the worst mistakes possible. Oftentimes, prudence leads to inaction. Inaction is also a decision. It's also a risk. So don't overvalue prudence and think that that is going to get you the kind of mileage that you might like for it too. You may be disappointed. Now, let's talk about one more. You've probably heard this term before, but it's something I see an awful lot in business, and that is a sunk cost fallacy. This is what happens when people think we've got to keep going because we've already come this far. We've already spent this much money, so we've got to continue to try to make some good on this investment. Here's a way that you've probably seen it happen. You hired somebody who it turns out was not a good hire for your team. This person doesn't fit. This person doesn't deliver. This person doesn't carry their weight. But you've spent all this time and energy training them, getting them on board, trying to integrate them into the team. So you keep going longer than you have to, longer than you should. And you do that because of a sunk cost fallacy that is keeping you from behaving in a way that would be more useful and productive. Be careful when it's time to make decisions. Don't let this one sink you. Now, to avoid decision traps, here we go at the end here. This is an important piece for us to consider. To avoid decision traps, be aware of your unconscious biases. No judgment, none whatsoever. We've all got them. It's the awareness that you want to aim for, not the eradication of them. And as you have that awareness, stir up more dialogue. Open yourself up more. Notice when decision traps and unconscious biases are emerging so that you can call them out. Name it, claim it, don't let it overrule your best judgment. Look for neutral, objective, varied, diverse input anytime that you're going to make a decision, even if you are extremely experienced and well versed in the topic in your own right. Don't succumb to worst case scenario, catastrophizing. Put yourself on balance. If I'm thinking to this level of extreme about the worst case scenario, let me put that on balance with the best case scenario in equal measure. Keep it proportionate so that you can stay neutral as much as possible. And always remember that when it comes to decisions, perfection isn't the goal. You're aiming for improvement. Improvement is going to be your best case scenario. Well, that's all the time that we have today to talk about decision traps and what to be aware of to make better quality decisions. Remember, we're going to talk about this again in 2022 as part of the Why Wait to Be Great series, and it will be a build out that goes beyond what we talked about in this particular session. Sign up for whatever is of interest to you. Leave me a review and a comment about the kinds of things you'd like to see here or over at People First Leadership Academy, where, by the way, there's also a lot of free content. So take a look at peoplefirstpotential.com and let me know what you need as you continue to build people potential in yourself and in your organization. See you next time.